Hi, I'm Underbelly, here with Ableton. Making music boring is easy. All you have to do is make sure that the energy level of your song never changes. But for those of us who want to make music not boring, it's often a good idea to change the energy level of your song throughout. Otherwise, the kids these days are just going to tune out. That's why in this movie, we'll be starting off by creating 4 different drum loops, all at different energy levels that will serve as jumping off points for different sections of our song. Let's get started. Okay, so check it. Here I have a blank live set open, and over on the left side in my content browser, I have a folder called Not Boring with a couple of instrument racks I've created. Let's go ahead and select my drum rack called Atomic Drums and add it to this empty MIDI track here just by double clicking, and wowzers. Okay, here are my drum sounds. Amazing. Let's go ahead and change the BPM of our session to 170 just by typing that in there in the tempo box and hitting enter. And I'm going to go ahead and create an empty MIDI clip just by double clicking on any one of these clip slots, and wowzers, here I have a 1-bar loop. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit longer. I'm going to go ahead and click here and type in 4 on the length and hit enter to make this a 4-bar loop. And let's go ahead and right click and change the grid size to 1/8 notes and enable the metronome here at the top, and wowzers. I'm going to start by making a very basic beat just by placing the snare here on the 3rd beat of every measure, and it's going to sound like this. Oh wowzers. Okay, that's the best beat I ever heard. Let's go ahead and put the kicks in. Kick on the 1 and the 2. Go ahead and add a secondary kick halfway through. And maybe some secondary snare, some ghost notes. Not bad. Let's add an open hi-hat right here. And just for fun, let's go ahead and add one last tom at the end there. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now let's go ahead and hit duplicate loop over on the left side here. And what that does is it makes the loop we've created twice as long. It copies all the MIDI information, and now I can make a slight variation in the second half here. So let's go ahead and place an open hi-hat right at the beginning of measure 5 there. Maybe take that last tom there, change it to a different tom sound, push it over to the right. Oh wowzer, sounding beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and disable the metronome here, and check it out. This is sort of a low energy drum loop, perfect for something for an intro. So let's go ahead and rename this clip and call it I for intro. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this clip just by right clicking once more and hitting duplicate. And I'm going to create a new clip and title it A. And for A, we really want the energy level of the drums to go up. Very easy way to do that would be to add some hi-hats. Here I have 2 different hi-hat samples here, 1 and 2, sounding slightly different. So what we can do is place a hi-hat on every quarter note and simply just alternate. So 1 and then 2. And what I'm going to do here is highlight both of these hi-hats here just by clicking and dragging and holding down Command D, and wowzer, simply copies the same hi-hat pattern over to the entire clip. Let's hear how that sounds. Oh, beautiful. Okay, now here's the thing. A real drummer cannot play both an open and a closed hi-hat at the same time. So what we can do here, just to make this a little bit more realistic, is to pay attention to where that open hi-hat hits and deactivate the closed hi-hats underneath just by highlighting the note and hitting 0 on our keyboards. And let's just do that here as well. And the reason why I'm deactivating rather than deleting is that it's a little less destructive, and it helps make me see which notes I have deactivated as opposed to just deleting them outright. So let's go ahead and continue deactivating wherever we see an open hi-hat here, and let's just take a listen. Okay, not bad. Pretty good. I'm going to take that closed hi-hat out there as well, and at the end. Okay, wowzers, that's sounding pretty realistic there. Let's go ahead and duplicate A once more just by hitting Command D and call this clip B. And for B, we really want the energy to max out here. Very easy way to create a lot of energy right at the beginning there is by adding a crash. Okay, just by double clicking. And let's actually go ahead and take all of these hi-hat one hits just by clicking on the black piano key next to the MIDI notes and just click and drag them up to the ride here. Generally speaking, rides have a little bit more energy than closed hi-hats. So let's take a listen. Once again, take out the rides wherever that crash is hitting just to make it a little bit more realistic. Let's hear it. Okay, beautiful. Oh, wowzers, I'm very happy with that. Okay, let's go ahead and create one last clip here. I'm going to duplicate B and call this new clip O, short for outro. And generally speaking, outros low energy, so we probably want to take out a couple of hits here. Let's take out the crash just by deactivating, and probably all of the rides as well, and probably most of the hi-hats as well, just to really make that energy nice and low for the outro. Let's take a listen. Okay. Okay, so now we have 4 different drum clips, all at different energy levels. Let's go ahead and listen to them one more time. Here I have the I clip. Once again, pretty low energy for an intro. Then I have the A clip, a little bit more energy, maybe for our verse or build-up section. Then we have B, maximum energy, maybe for our chorus or a drop. And then finally, we have O, low energy, something for our outro. So now we can use these 4 different clips as jumping off points for different sections of our song. Let's go ahead and start with the I clip for our intro. Okay, so for my intro, I'm going to go ahead and add some piano. I'm going to click and drag the piano instrument from my Not Boring folder into the session view. And for this piano sound, I'm using the Pianotech Stage VST, and I'm running it through some convolution reverb to give it a bit of space, OTT to brighten it up, glue compression to give it some controlled dynamics here, and an EQ8 to cut out some of the low end. The piano sound is a little bit like this. Nice and pretty. Let's go ahead and play something in for our intro. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm actually going to rename this piano clip I and color code it pink to match the other clip there. I'm actually going to rename all my scenes I, A, B, and O just to keep things nice and organized. And actually, I'm pretty happy with this for my intro. Let's go ahead and take this piano clip we just recorded, hit Command D to duplicate it, and rename this new clip A. And let's actually move on to our A scene just by triggering it over on the right side. Okay, that's pretty good. Now for A, we want the energy level to go up. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a guitar melody sound that I created. Actually, the sound is very simple. I started it with actually a built-in Ableton instrument, the nylon concerto guitar. Sounds like this, and I added some clean rhythm funk guitar, a little bit of guitar rig to brighten up the sound, and some Camel Crusher to just squash it. And I really love that sound. I'm actually going to raise the octave on my keyboard here so it sounds a little bit like this. I'm just going to record a real simple melodic idea for this A section. And 3, 4. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. Once again, I'm going to rename this clip A. I'm actually going to color code all these clips in my A section orange since it's a little harder, slightly higher energy level. But let's keep adding to it. I'm going to go ahead and add some Rhodes here as well, just for a little bit of texture on top. It's going to sound a little bit like this. Let's record. Not bad. Once again, I'm gonna rename that clip, color code it orange. Let's add another element though. I'm gonna go ahead and click and drag some strings from my Not Boring folder. And for this, I'm using the Spitfire Audio Lab strings. These are absolutely free, sound amazing. I'm just gonna hold out a chord here for the strings. Once again, color code that, call it A, sounding amazing. Okay, so those strings are sounding pretty good, but let's see if we can make them sound a little bit more dynamic. On the strings patch, I'm going to go ahead and solo it out, and you'll see that there's a couple different audio effects making up the sound. First off, I have the Camel Crusher, of course, to squash the sound, and then after that, I also have this auto pan here, which is creating sort of a tremolo effect. You can hear it if I start messing with the rate. So faster tremolo, slower. And then after that, I also have this chorus, which if I turn up the feedback knob, creates this crazy metallic-y effect. Sounds amazing. Now, what would be really cool is if I had both of these parameters change as the track was playing. So what I'm going to do is map a couple knobs on my MIDI controller to the feedback and rate knobs on the chorus and the auto pan. And the way I'm going to do that is just by hitting the MIDI map button over on the upper right corner of Live and Wowzers. You'll see every parameter that can be mapped is turned blue, and I'm going to go ahead and select the rate parameter on the auto pan and just twist the knob that I want to map it to on my controller. As you can see, the mapping is automatically applied, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing for the feedback knob on my chorus. I'm just going to use the second knob on my controller here, and if I go out and exit the MIDI mapping mode just by hitting that MIDI button again, wowzers, you'll see, both of these knobs in Live are now responding to my movements on the controller, and now we're ready to record. So I'm going to go ahead and unsolo this. I'm going to make sure that the automation record button is enabled at the top of my session view here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit the session record button and start twisting those knobs. Let's do it. Oh yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. Okay, so already that's sounding super dynamic and amazing. Wowzers. Okay, so now that we got those pesky strings out of the way, it's time to add what really matters, the bass. I'm going to go ahead and go over to my Instruments tab in the Content browser and click and drag the operator instrument into the session view. And for this sound, I'm just going to go ahead and take oscillator B and change the wave shape to a sawtooth digital, turn up the level just a little bit, and also turn up the chorus so we get a little bit more visible harmonics. So without oscillator B, it's kind of hard to hear, just pure sub. With B, just a little bit more visible in the mix. So I'm just going to go ahead and lay down a real simple bass line. Let's get it. here's the thing. The bass sound is okay. Let's see if we can make it better by adding some movement to the bass. I'm going to go ahead and first off rename this clip A and also color code it orange to match everything else in the scene here. And we're going to start by adding a ton of distortion to this bass sound. And whenever we do that, just to keep it safe, I'm going to start by adding a utility and also a limiter to this bass sound so that there's no risk of clipping. I'm going to start by adding Ableton's saturator before the utility and the limiter, and also change it to the wave shaper setting. I'm going to solo out this bass sound and start by cranking the drive here on the saturator. Okay, getting louder for sure. Let's turn on soft clip here and also turn up the bass. Oh, there's that crunch we're looking for. Let's go ahead and lower the ceiling on the limiter just to make sure that we're nowhere near zero here. Now let's move on by adding the amp audio effect after the saturator and changing it to the bass setting. And let's just go ahead and crank the bass and the treble, and why not the middle as well, just to really get that crunch. And I'm going to move on by adding the auto filter after. Now it's not really doing a whole lot right now. Let's go ahead and turn up the resonance here and also change it to the bandpass. And I really love the bandpass here because as I start messing with the frequency cutoff, creates a bunch of really interesting movement in the bass. I'm going to crank up the limiter here just a little bit so we can really hear it. Whew, here we go. Okay, now that's sounding decent. Let's see if we can make the bass sound a little bit wider by using some chorus here. I'm going to put that on after the auto filter, turn up the dry wet all the way, turn up the feedback, change the polarity to negative, and mess with the modulation here just a little bit. Let's hear that. Whew, okay, now we're getting into that neuro bass territory. But let's see if we can make it even wider and more textured by adding Ableton's convolution reverb. And for this, I really love the ambiances and small rooms presets here on the convolution reverb. Just gives it a little bit more texture and grit. Okay, and now after that, let's go ahead and minimize the chorus and the convolution reverb just by double clicking. And last but not least here, we're going to go to our multiband dynamics and apply the OTT. Now here's the thing, OTT is like the MSG of EDM, just completely squashes everything, makes it sound super bright and in your face, especially if we turn up the mid-high crossover on the OTT. Just gives it a nice little bit of texture. Whew, here we go. Oh yeah. All right. Now here's the thing. We applied a lot of widening effects, such as the chorus and the convolution reverb to this sound, and just to make sure that our sub is still mono, just to make sure that there's no phase cancellation going on, let's go ahead and turn on the bass mono on the utility. Basically what that does is it makes everything underneath this frequency cutoff point, in this case 120 Hertz, perfectly mono, so we don't have to worry about any phasing in our sub frequencies. And I'm just going to turn up the gain a little bit more on the limiter. Okay, now that's the kind of bass sound I'm looking for. Wowzers. Now, to give the bass some extra movement, I'm going to go ahead and map a fader on my controller to the filter cutoff in the auto filter to get that crazy wompiness in the bass. I'm going to start by going over to my MIDI mapping mode once again on the upper right corner inside of Live. Once again, everything turns blue, and I'm going to select the frequency cutoff knob on the auto filter and simply move the appropriate fader on my controller. And wowzers, if we take a listen, I'm going to solo out the bass. Oh, here we go. Ho-ho! Okay, so what I'm going to do, similar to what we were doing with the strings, is I'm simply going to make sure that automation record is enabled, once again, right up here. And I'm just going to record myself messing with this fader as the bass plays. So let's do it. Oh, that's sounding pretty good. Hell yeah. Okay, So whenever I create a new crazy bass sound like this one, I always like to bounce it to audio. That way it's a lot easier to cut up and manipulate, and it's also easier on our CPU as well. So let's go inside of Live. I'm going to rename this track Bass, and I'm also going to create a duplicate just by hitting Command D. And on this duplicate, I'm going to right click again and hit Freeze. And basically what freezing does is it allows Live to record the output of this track and turn it into audio so it doesn't have to think about it so much anymore. Let's go ahead and right click again and hit flatten, and wowzers, now we have this beautiful piece of audio. Look at that sausage. Looks amazing. Now I want to cut it up and rearrange it, so let's go ahead and copy this, hit Tab over on our keyboards here, and just hit Command V to paste it over into the arrangement view. Right now you'll notice everything's grayed out because we haven't told Live to start playing off of the arrangement just yet. Let's hit that orange back to arrangement button over on the upper right, and wowzers, here we have the audio, and now we're free to just cut it up and rearrange it. And what I really like to do is go over into my WOMPs folder here and actually find some cool other bass sounds that I've created in the past and just splice them in there to create a sort of bass montage. So I'm going to take this woo chump sound. I'm terrible at naming. Let's see what we can do here. I'm going to zoom in, maybe push that sound a little bit to the right, and just see what it sounds like just spliced in there real quick. Kind of cool there. Maybe I could also take another neuro sound I've made in the past and just see how it sounds there as well. And then maybe just go back into the original here. Just paste somewhere in there. And basically this is, a super fun but also time-consuming process. So I've actually done this ahead of time. If I go back to my Not Boring folder and also into the session view here, I have Neural Bass Beat, where basically I've taken the same process and just spliced up this bass sound with a couple other crazy sound effects I've made in the past. And I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag that over to my new bass track and just call this B. Now I'm going to delete the A track here. I'm just going to use the original bass track for that. And I'm going to go ahead and color code these two B clips red because after all, this is the highest level of energy in our track here. And let's just take a listen here. Ooh, that's sounding fat. Oh, wowzers. Okay, just to contrast the heaviness of the bass in this section, I'm going to go ahead and play something light and pretty on my Rhodes. Let's do it. Okay, that's sounding nice and pretty. Let's go ahead and rename this clip B, and once again color code it red to match everything else in this scene. And I think that about wraps it up for the B section. Okay, now for our outro, I'm going to go back to the piano here and play a sort of extended version of the riff I presented in the intro. Let's do it. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and rename this clip O, color code both of these last clips blue, kind of a low energy section for our outro. And now we have 4 distinct scenes, all at different energy levels in our track. Let's go ahead and listen through to them one more time. I'm going to go ahead and trigger the I clip here, I section. Okay, once again, our intro, kind of a low energy section to start out the song. Just 2 elements here. Let's jump to our A section. Whew, huge jump in energy. Lots of new elements happening here. Great contrast from the intro. super heavy. And then our B section. Let's just hit him with the bass. Super hard section. A little bit of prettiness with the Rhodes. This is our maximum energy. And then let's do the outro. Cool it down. And then also offer a new musical idea for us to take the piece somewhere else. And now that we have these 4 distinct scenes, it makes the arrangement process so much easier because we know exactly where we're going with our piece. So I hope you had fun today. Once again, I'm Underbelly here with Ableton. Thank you for watching.